We are doing it live right here and doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business with the news-driven hour right after Ben Shapiro. And just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek on Money, live on the air right now, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide, kbc.com. And yes, the on-demand Mottek on Money podcast at kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Well, another triple-digit move for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and guess what? It was lower again. In fact, all three of the major averages moved lower today as those Treasury yields hit a 4-week high today, leaving the S&P 500 and NASDAQ down for the first time in 3 trading sessions. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of more than 400 points today, down 411 and change. The lowest closing we've seen since May 2nd, closing lower for the second straight day and the fourth time in the past 5 trading sessions. The Dow coming down from its recent all-time high, which was above 40,000 a couple of Fridays ago. Right now it stands at 38,441. The S&P 500 moved lower today by 39 points, and the NASDAQ ended lower by 99 points, finishing off its record close of 17,020, which was hit on Tuesday. NASDAQ now stands at 16,920. NVIDIA, at another record high today, closing up $9.24 at $1,148.25 a share. Big news in the oil business, getting lots of attention on the news today. ConocoPhillips, the oil giant, announcing an all-stock deal for Marathon Oil, which values Marathon Oil at $17.5 billion. It could mark the end of several years of consolidation among the industry big players, according to oil industry observers. This deal will expand ConocoPhillips' shale basin and represents a nearly 15% premium for Marathon Oil shareholders based on the previous closing price. ConocoPhillips said the acquisition of Marathon will immediately be accretive to earnings, cash flows, and return of capital per share. That is big news in the oil patch today, and Marathon stock responded by closing up 9%, looks like, and the ConocoPhillips shares down 2.5%. Among the big movers of the day here, we saw a Marathon ending the day just about up 8.5% here. And we'll take a closer look at that, of course, coming up here. We're also following developments in the Middle East impacting oil prices. Here in California, too, following the October 7th Hamas terror attack on Israel, discord from last month's mob attack on pro-Palestinian students and activists encamped at UCLA flared again this week as academic workers staged a protest strike on campus, protesting UCLA's response to the incident. The global community's silence on Hamas atrocities, meanwhile, against Israel is deeply troubling and dangerous for future human rights, so says one of the most prominent religious leaders in the world, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Museum of Tolerance in West Los Angeles. Rabbi Abraham Cooper will be joining me live later this hour. Inflation back in the spotlight, and this time focused on hot dogs today. Frank inflation, they're calling it. Americans love hot dogs, spending billions annually at supermarkets, restaurants, and, of course, baseball stadiums. And according to the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council, it looks like hot dog prices are going up. Price of Frank surging by 7.1% in the past year, according to the latest Consumer Price Index report. Consumers in hot water as a result of that. For our Canadian friends today, the union representing pilots at WestJet Airlines, regional carrier, issuing a 72-hour strike notice today with labor disruptions at Canada's second-largest airline starting as early as Saturday. A thief at the IRS stealing the files of at least 50,000 Americans, much higher than previously estimated. We'll get the latest on that and more on what's happening on the tax front this afternoon from our taxpayer advocate Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, hot dogs, and the whole works. Joining us live now, money manager Ken Winans, president of Winans Investments, market historian, author of Investment Atlas 1 and 2, and Forbes magazine contributor. Ken Winans, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
My pleasure, Frank. And, it's too bad about hot dogs is I happen to be one of those people that enjoy them. But you know what? It's summertime. Prices seem to go up on luxury items, and it's sad but true. And, a couple of things that I think it's always interesting when you get into this time of the year from my perspective, since I look at everything, including commodities, going into June can be a very volatile time. And let's start with stocks first. You mentioned what happened with the rates on treasuries ratcheting up. What that also means is that in the corporate bond world, bond prices are moving down. So you're seeing some money leaving stocks going towards bonds because at this point, people just want to lock in a pretty good yield. They have concerns geopolitically. They have concerns politically, and you see that shift of money going on. But also too, market seasonality. Anybody who's in the stock market probably needs to be aware that the markets don't go straight up. They are not a ladder. They don't climb like that. There are ebbs and flows, and just like the tides in the ocean. And the ebbing effect for stocks, and I don't care what index you look at, it includes tech, is really the end of May to the end of October. You typically find that the markets don't produce the big results that basically of everything we saw in the first 5 months of this year. It would not be a bad thing to have basically a brief hiatus, let things kind of recoil, let them recharge, and going forward. So we are, I think, in my opinion, we're going to have a bit of the summer doldrums. And then if you want to also throw on top of that, you mentioned what's going on with crude oil. A statistic that nobody likes, but it is just simply a fact, is that in the month of June, here, hang on a second, let me just look it up here just to give the actual facts since we like to have them. But in the month of June, you have oil prices traditionally, since 2000, 70% of the time, it goes up at least 3% during that month. So a lot of it's, Frank, it's tied to driving season. It's certainly travel on cruise liners, jets, you name it. So I don't think you're going to see any reduction in the, basically, sadly, what we see at the pump, but seeing it on things like hot dogs. It takes natural or fossil fuels to make those hot dogs. It all goes up in the chain.
Well, thanks for being frank about that today, Ken. Turning now to the other big story, NVIDIA at a record high again, despite today's overall market pullback. NVIDIA continues on a roll. Looks like it's slightly lower here in after-hours trading, but closing at more than $9 to $1,148.25 a share. A record high close again today for NVIDIA following the earnings news that came out last weekend. What are your thoughts about this one?
You know, it's just one of those amazing stocks that it's hitting on all cylinders. But I would just caution everybody, especially people tempted to jump into it at this point in time, it's up 27% this quarter. It's up 132% this year, and it is approximately 82% off of its 200-day moving average. That is pretty rich. If somebody wants to jump into a stock like that that's already had the run, I mean, it has nothing to do with the long-term story, with AI and certainly everything else they're working on. But if it doesn't pull back and you want to step into it now, maybe buy half of it now, wait to buy the rest on a pullback, or if you decide to go full bore, go in on it, I would encourage you to use a stop loss order because this is a very volatile stock. It doesn't take much for it to pull back. But no, it's on a tear, Frank. But as you said, you know, the rest of the market had a tough time today, including an awful lot of tech stocks. I'm seeing a lot of red on my screen that were basically stocks that have been flying for the first 4 months of this year.
Right, and of course, NVIDIA also getting set, we're told, for a 10-for-1 stock split. Would any guidance on that? Would you wait until after the split, or would you go for it now? And what are your general thoughts about stock splits and what they ultimately do?
Well, a couple of things. Now, the idea, and let's talk it back into it for a moment. The reason that NVIDIA is splitting its stock, it actually has nothing to do with its valuation. It has nothing to do with anybody losing anything. But what they're trying to do is, since this stock is so popular with individual investors, they want to bring the price point down to an area where medium to small investors don't feel uncomfortable as they would right now. You're spending $1,150 for one share of NVIDIA. If you pay any form of trading costs, that can be higher. So by bringing it back down, it just makes it more available for everyday investors, which is what the company's trying to do. Personally, I like it when companies split their stocks. I think it's healthy to get a broader base of ownership in them. then I know Warren Buffett has longly said with Berkshire Hathaway, I'll never split it. And it's out of reach for many, many people. So this is a good sign, not a bad sign that they're willing to do this.
Very good. And we're on the air live with money manager Ken Winans, president of Winans Investments, also author of Investment Atlas 1 and 2 and Forbes magazine contributor. Now, this mega merger in the oil patch did not set off a rally today. It did set off a rally for Marathon Oil stock, the subject of this takeover by ConocoPhillips. A lot of people think this might be the last of the big oil mergers. Ken, what are your thoughts about this big deal and M&A activity overall this year?
Well, let's jump into it this way. When you do M&A, mergers and acquisitions is what the phrase stands for. A lot of it is borrowing costs. Can an acquiring firm borrow money at an effective rate to be able to buy what, in many cases, are stocks trading at historical highs? So some firms can get the money, others can't. But I think particularly in the case of oil and gas, I think it's very political. I think it depends on who is the next person in the White House. And clearly, Donald Trump has made it clear he's going to drill, baby, drill. If he wins, I think that you can see a lot of the oil stocks, certainly consolidation, but even globally, you could see a record expansion, especially with what's going on in the Middle East with geopolitical concerns. You can see a lot of the areas in this hemisphere really open up with that kind of change in philosophy, including offshore. Technologies have gotten better. Go back and look at what's going on with Canada. Canada is very dependent on selling energy. So but again, it's very political. It depends which way the pendulum swings in November.
All right. And, of course, that is going to be a big question here. And the price of oil, by the way, is just below $80 a barrel here at $79.33 at the moment in New York. The yield in the 10-year note at 4.98%. Looks like home buyers are getting a bit of a break for a little while here when the yield had pulled back, impacting the fixed-rate mortgage rates. And obviously a lot of attention now, as you mentioned earlier, Ken, focused on these bond yields. The Fed's next move and all of that. We heard from Neil Kashkari, the head of the Minneapolis Fed, the former California gubernatorial candidate here in California some years ago, said that they can't rule out a rate hike. What do you think the Fed's next move will be? Will there be a rate hike, and where do these bond yields go from here?
The rate hike, and it's funny because I'm getting asked this question a lot when we had all assumed that the next move was to bring rates down. We're in one of these weird tug-of-wars right now. The Federal Reserve has a very single mandate. They are looking at employment and they're looking at inflation. And when you still have employment looking fairly good across the board in the country, and you're looking at inflation that's still running hot and is going to continue to run hot with everything we just talked about, there's very little hope, in my opinion, that we're going to see inflation really move down all that much this year. So when you have that happening, you have to ask yourself, okay, the Fed does not like to be in the hot seat during election years. They worry about retribution from the political side. They don't like to be blamed publicly for things. So I think you'd have to have inflation really take off throughout the summer months, something that we just, almost would go back to what happened a couple of years ago. That I doubt that's going to happen. Although, let's keep in mind, I mentioned earlier, June is a very volatile month for a lot of commodities. You talked about food prices. Unfortunately, things like sugar and soybeans and cattle, they typically move up in June historically. So you're going to see prices moving up and down in certain commodities. We shouldn't necessarily think that means overall inflation's going up. But again, you asked my direct opinion, Frank. I don't think the Fed's going to do anything this year. I think it's highly unlikely we're going to have any kind of concerted Fed action unless they're pushed to do it in 2024. 2025 is a different animal because if we're going to be changing tax policies next year, the Fed's going to be put into a box and they might have to raise rates then if that causes problems with the economy. So there's a lot of things we have to think about for the remainder of, I'd say, the next 12 months. But for the next 6 months, I don't think there's much to worry about.
On the air live with money manager Ken Winans, and the earnings parade continues. Ken, we see Salesforce's stock has tumbled as the earnings provide the latest dose of software sector pain. According to MarketWatch, the stock could notch its steepest daily decline since 2008, the financial crisis days, as the company sees elongated deal cycles, deal compression, and high levels of budget scrutiny. Your reaction to this one? Anything instructional here?
Well, I think that there's a lesson with, you look at Salesforce, which is symbol CRM, which is it had lagged all year. When you look at the rest of the tech names, certainly the ones that I track, when you look at the big names in AI, and you look at Salesforce, which is, by the way, part of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, so we can expect there's going to be further pressure there. It is lagged. And when you have stocks in a hot sector that just don't seem to go with the flow, they don't have the same momentum. My rule as a money manager is, I think you have to get rid of them and just realize there's other things you can invest in that are performing better. You might want to call it momentum-based investing, but I think you can find fundamental reasons why that stock has simply not kept up. And now investors that have been patient, hoping it would catch up to the rest of the tech stocks, unfortunately, they're paying a dear price because the symptom was there. All the symptoms were there that Salesforce was having issues. And people just, I think, held on to it too long. I would just say that you have other stories like that play out from this point into the fall. If you have laggards in your portfolio, this is a great time to get rid of them. Even if you just want the money sitting in cash, looking for future buying opportunities. But I wouldn't hold on to the dogs in the dog days of summer. It usually is not a winning strategy.
All right, another reminder that it's not all rainbows and ice cream cones out there. Do you see this? Shares of EV startup Faraday Future Intelligent Electric, that's the official name of Faraday EVs, plunging 62% today, marking this stock's largest single-day decline on record. This one, the lowest close, let's see, around 29 cents or so, down 62%. You're down after hours at 39 cents. I stand corrected, down 5 cents to 39 cents. After hours, during the day, it was down significantly. Ken, what's your reaction to this one and the whole EV space for that matter?
This is a tough one, and I know that unfortunately people try to make it political and social, and this show's about money and economics, so you clearly have to have that in the forefront. My worry about the entire green space, which includes EV and certainly solar and a lot of these other things, is that I know that many people are committed to it, and that's great, but don't necessarily commit your money to it. You can commit yourself in other ways. And the fact that Tesla has had such problems and the stock's been on such a roller coaster, it's not a surprise to me that other EV startups are having these kind of problems. And this is in spite of the fact that the federal and state governments have been pouring lots of money into alternatives. It came out today, the Biden administration is going to give out all kinds of new tax credits far beyond solar and wind. So that just tells you the government's continuing to pump money into it, but these stocks are not responding. At the end of the day, you have to make money. You have to show growth. And when you don't do it, the stock market correctly values you, and this is what's happened here. It's off its course. And I think that, again, you have to be careful with the concept of ESG investing, which is what we used to call in the old day socially responsible investing. Again, people have to make up their own choices on this. But for people who are having a tough time that have these strong views, unwilling to buy conventional energy plays or commodities in this time, when you have commodities like natural gas and oil moving up so far, you just don't beat up on your managers too much. If you've been telling them, don't buy these things, you have to go back and reassess your strategy. But Frank, you're going to see more, in my opinion, more bad news in the EV space, especially if there's a change in administrations in November.
And right quick, any other specific places where you'd be putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Well, today's sell-off was actually pretty broad-based. So, people who have been looking, trying to buy into anything but NVIDIA hitting a new high, and you have your target list, you might want to, jump in on a few things. But a couple of names that I would take a good look at, I've been talking for quite a while about the home builders. Go look at Pulte, PUL. It's a great stock. It's doing well. I would also in the financial space, people spend money during the vacation times. They use their credit cards. Look at American Express. Look at MasterCards. These stocks typically do well in summertime and holidays. So that's where I'd be looking right now, Frank.
Ken Winans, thank you very much for joining us live here. That is Money Manager Ken Winans, president of Winans Investments, market historian, author of Investment Atlas 1 and 2, and Forbes magazine contributor. Live with us here, Mottek on Money on 790 KABC. Folks, if you're hurt in an accident, you need an experienced advocate. And Clark Fielding and his team of sharks at Fielding Law are on standby ready to dive into your case. My friend Clark the Shark is fearless for justice and your go-to attorney when injured in an accident that was not your fault. Whether it is a car accident, slip, trip, fall, or any kind of personal injury, Fielding Law is here to make sure you get the care, attention, and compensation you deserve. Fielding Law can assess the circumstances of the case, negotiate tenaciously with the insurance companies, and if needed, file a lawsuit and litigate to seek fair compensation on behalf of you, the injured party. An injury is a major disruption in your life. Medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, property damage, and other losses incurred as a result of that injury are all part of the damages. Don't try and handle the process alone. You need an expert in the process. The team at Fielding Law are the ones to trust. Put Clark Fielding's number in your phone under the word accident right now. That number is 833-88-SHARK, 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Mottek on Money continues here, 790 KBC. Good afternoon. Stock slipping from recent highs. The Dow down 411 points today, 411. What's the 411 on this? Well, the Dow settled at 38,441. The S&P 500 down 39 at 5,267. And the NASDAQ slipping from its record high recently, down nearly 100 points to 16,920. Yield in the 10-year note is back up to 4.98%. That's the one that impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates, which for a while they were coming down. But looks like they're set to pop again tomorrow when we get that survey from mortgage giant Freddie Mac. That'll be coming out first thing tomorrow morning on mortgage rates. The price of oil hovering just below $80 a barrel, ticking slightly higher today. Shares of Marathon Oil moving up nearly 8.5% on this buyout by ConocoPhillips. Shares of United Airlines rebounding today, up more than 2%, but shares of American Airlines tumbling 13.5% today. Shares of Valero down nearly 5%. Mixed bag in the oil patch as well today. NVIDIA on a tear at a record high close today, again at more than $9 at $1,148.25 a share. We saw shares of Faraday, the EV maker, down 62% today, closing down 72 cents to 44 cents. And down another 11% after hours. Fisker, by the way, down a fraction today, down 8% to 6 cents a share. And now the latest news here on 790 KABC. Mottek on Money continues here in 790 KABC. A lot of business people and, individuals too, talking about taxes these days. And the contrast between President Trump and President Biden on taxes couldn't be any clearer, with President Biden recently flat out saying taxes will be raised under his administration if he's reelected. Under President Trump, he's indicated that he would maintain the Trump tax cuts. Meanwhile, a thief at the IRS stealing the files of at least 50,000 Americans, much higher than previously estimated. Let's get the latest on that and everything on the tax front this afternoon from our taxpayer advocate, Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover Norquist, thanks for taking the call here this afternoon. First of all, on this legal case here where someone who worked at the IRS stealing the files of thousands of Americans, it turned out to be even more than first thought, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's worse than you can imagine. Here you had a guy named Charles Littlejohn who came into the IRS and worked, and for years just wandered through pulling out people's tax returns that he had no business going after. And he pulled out and gave to a left-wing political action group so they could attack these people, somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 individuals, entities. That includes Taylor Swift, Tiger Woods, Lorne Michaels of Saturday Night Live, Calvin Klein of underwear fame, LeBron James. And they went after Bloomberg, who had the temerity to run against President Biden and released his taxes to the world. But I mean, this is people's privacy, right? This is not anybody who did anything wrong. They claimed they were trying to say, well, this proves that we don't audit enough rich people. Here's one of the problems. Much of the data they put out were people's audits. That's what they had. The ones they said weren't being audited. Plus, nobody's said any of the people there, any of the 50,000 weren't paying their taxes. They just had their privacy invaded. There is a law that got passed because the Clinton people were going through people's taxes in the way that you're not supposed to during the Clinton years. I served on a commission to go through the awfulness that Clinton was, which is nothing compared to Obama and Biden. And a law was passed. 5 years in prison if you work at the IRS and you hand somebody's data to people who don't have access to it, right? I mean, you can look at it if you're the IRS, and the person who wrote it can look at it, but you can't hand it out to somebody else to strip somebody of their privacy. 5 years in jail for one example. 50,000 cases. And what did the Biden people do? They only charged him for one count, not 50,000. Should have been 5 years times 50,000. That's a lot. Instead, it was 5 years for one count, and that's not even going to get done. The Biden Justice Department basically said, you know what? We don't care. If you steal people's data and you take it out for political purposes and use it to harass people, there will be no real punishment. The company that this guy, Little John, worked for, that when he was in there, just got a several billion-dollar contract just to make sure that it was clear to the rest of us that the government wasn't upset. There's a lot of talk about, democracy is being destroyed because somebody's losing elections that they don't want or whatever. This is the rule of law that is being destroyed in front of us. The government violating people's privacy on taxes, and nothing is done about it. And by the way, they've known it was 50,000 for years. This was released after the trial, after it was all known. And for years, they lied to Congress and said, we don't know what's going on. Who knows? Somebody's doing an investigation, whoever that is. I mean, they lied to members of Congress again and again and again and to the American people about this. And it only came out because a reporter, a writer for the Wall Street Journal, got a note saying, you're one of the people that was targeted. And as a result, he was allowed, that had their stuff stolen and shared. He worked for The Sun, which is a conservative newspaper in New York City, which may give you some idea of who they're targeting. And so he was able to get some information out of the government. Nobody else could. That's how the story was written. They didn't even tell the truth when asked. It had to be pulled out of the government. This is really scary stuff.
What you just laid out is absolutely shocking and outrageous. And if people aren't mad they're not paying attention, that is really, really something, Grover Norquist. So thanks for laying it out on the line. I've not heard this anyplace else except here. So thank you for well informing this audience on that very, very important matter. That is really, really something. Certainly, this election coming up is very important from a tax standpoint. We heard President Biden, through his various surrogates, again say that taxes will be going up if he's reelected. Do you think he's kidding, or what's going to happen here, you think?
Well, he put it in writing. This is a government document he put out. Capital gains tax up to 44.6%. 44.6%. In California, add your state tax at 60%. You work every day with a small business. You pay your property taxes, your local taxes, your income taxes, your state income taxes every year. Then you get to the end, you sell the business. That's your big payday. This is how you're going to retire. This is what you've accomplished in life. And between California and Joe Biden, they're going to take 60% of everything you made during your life in that one tax, after all the other taxes, sales taxes, Social Security taxes, everything else that they've taken out. That's 44.6%. In 100 years, it's never been that high before. He wants to take the corporate income tax, this is Biden, up higher than China's, higher than France, to make us not competitive in the world. He wants to add a second death tax, not just the one death tax we have, but a second one, which will catch all the inflation that took place during your life or your parents' life, so that you pay taxes on the appreciation of assets that you have that were just inflation. So that 18% tax, you go, why is he inflating the currency 18%? Well, you know what? If you're stupid enough to die, he's going to be taxing that 18% if you have, assets, a house, land, small business, investments, whatever. That's what they're going to be coming after. They've also announced, now they didn't put a number on this, they want to do a carbon tax. They want to do an energy tax, a big energy tax. In Europe, they're huge and devastating. Who knows what they'll start? They'll probably start small, you assume. But when you get to Europe, This is what's damaging the French economy, the German economy, the high energy taxes that they have now. He wants to import those here, and then he wants to put a floor, this is Biden, under all taxes so that America cannot compete with Europe or China by having lower taxes and less regulatory burden. The only way we'll compete is by having lower wages. That's what we're going to have to compete with China on, because Biden has agreed to tell the Chinese and the Europeans, oh, we won't cut our taxes. Look, the last time the British tried to tell us what our tax rates should be, we started shooting at them and made them leave. Biden's inviting the Europeans in to set our tax rates. I mean, it's really an outrageous collection of tax increases. Plus, add to that, he wants to abolish all of the Trump tax cuts. The $1,000 per child tax credit, gone. The standard deduction, gone. The lower rates, every American had lower rates under Trump than under Obama, gone. Those go back up.
All right,
to
get
Obama
the Tea Party ready.
rates.
Get the Tea Party ready, Grover. Thank you very much for that thorough update here. As always, Grover Norquist, President of Americans for Tax Reform, live with us here. Mottek on Money on 790 KABC. Mottek on Money continues here in 790 KABC. Good afternoon. We're following developments in the Middle East very closely, as well as developments here in California following the October 7th Hamas terror attack on Israel. The United Nations top court, the International Court of Justice, issuing a directive that Israel immediately end its latest actions in Gaza. Meanwhile, unionized academic researchers, graduate teaching assistants, and postdoctoral scholars at UCLA walked off the job this week over what they regard as unfair labor practices. And UCLA's handling of pro-Palestinian demonstrations in recent weeks. They were joined by fellow academic workers at two other UC campuses, UC Davis and UC Santa Cruz. Meanwhile, the global community's silence on Hamas atrocities against Israel, also deeply troubling. Joining us live now, one of the most prominent religious leaders in the world, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action at the Simon Wiesenthal Center Museum of Tolerance in West Los Angeles. Rabbi Cooper, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Thank you. It's good to be home and to take it in the same time zone.
Yes, thank you very much for that call from Jerusalem last time, Rabbi. We appreciate it and appreciate your staying in close contact with us. Tell us what's top of mind as this war continues.
Well, I just received a very disturbing report, believe it or not, from Japan. But in a sense, it shouldn't be a shock when you have someone who's somewhat prominent journalist actually writing that they've uncovered that October 7th was a hoax. And that's something that's been parroted and played by Hamas and its supporters globally, especially on social media, and the virtual silence of almost every UN agency, of the International Red Cross, of at least 50 women's NGOs that we contacted over what happened to the mass murders and mass rapes, killings of Israeli women. It shouldn't be coming as a shock. So from the point of view of the global community, and we see it being played out in the both in the ICC and the ICJ in a very political way, Israel, which is the victim here of the attack from Hamas, of an invasion, a military invasion. I went there myself, and 7 months later, you can still feel and even smell the results of death. They have managed to flip the script. And so the victim is now put forward as the victimizer, and the terrorist victimizers are now seen as worthy of support on the elite academic campuses on both sides of the Atlantic. It really is outrageous. I think, gratefully, it doesn't speak to the vast majority of Americans, you might say the silent majority. And what we see here, not just at Columbia and MIT, University of Chicago, but as you covered and the people in Los Angeles here experienced, the UCLA debacle, the failure of its leadership and chancellor to deal with it, the hearings that took place on Capitol Hill, and this continuing embrace of Hamas's narrative, murderous narrative, as something that's worthy of support, while demonizing and denigrating the lone democracy in the Middle East. Now, that doesn't mean we don't mourn for innocent civilians who were thrust in between Hamas and the Israelis and are paying a significant price. But on the other hand, basically the failure of the international global community, as well as now the two of the top international courts that deal with serious issues like genocide and crimes against humanity, it's absolutely, it's not only abhorrent, it's downright dangerous. Mexico has just yesterday joined South Africa, its corrupt leader, in going after Israel at the International Criminal Court of Justice. That's, I believe, a UN agency. And guess what? On the very same day, a mob of 200 people tried to burn down the Israeli embassy in Mexico City. So this stuff is coordinated. I don't think that the average person in Mexico City, or the average person in our own city for that matter, has the Middle East issue on the front burner, let alone, ready to go to the barricades on it. But I think we have to say that the legacy media, the social media outlets, especially Telegram, you now have a situation where maybe the second most outrageous denial, we had the denial of the Holocaust from the Iranian regime, and given the opportunity, they'd finish it. And now we have the denial of October 7th, when we have the calls and footage that the Hamas murderers themselves took and shipped back by phone to their loved ones and comrades in Gaza, having that denied and having people in the international community and in NGOs basically either shrugging it off or saying, well, you really can't trust the Israelis and we're not sure it happened.
Rabbi, what you laid out is absolutely shocking and heartbreaking, and certainly, as you mentioned, the media certainly plays a role in this, and it's rarely even mentioned the October 7th Hamas terror attack in Israel, which started the war in the first place, and let's start with that. And I wish we had more time here, Rabbi, but I hope to speak with you again very, very soon. But thank you very much for laying out this very, very serious matter for us here this afternoon, and I want to support all of your efforts there at the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Museum of Tolerance, and look forward to your updates on the programs there as well. Thank you very much, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, for joining us live here.
Let me just say one thing. Thank you for caring, and thanks to KBC for making sure that the community can hear all sides of an issue.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Rabbi. We do appreciate it as always, and look forward to speaking with you again very, very soon, live here on Mottek on Money on 790 KBC.
Named one of the best personal finance podcasts, The Stacking Benjamin Show with Joe and his friends makes financial literacy fun.
Let's hear another success story. This one comes to us from Stacker Derek.
You guys are the best, and it's because of you I now understand retirement accounts, money in general, and how poorly the guests are treated when they show up. I really don't know where I would be without you. Thank you for $1,500, and here's to another $1,500 if Doug can survive that long without pay.
Find out more by searching the Stacking Benjamins podcast wherever you listen.